Welcome to the June edition of the Tempo Storm Shadowverse Meta Snapshot. Before we get too distracted by the barrage of reveals for the upcoming Roar of the Godwyrm expansion, let's take a final look at the Edge of Paradise meta. There have been very few observable changes in the general meta. The two Shadowcraft decks still reigned supreme, with Spellboost Rune tailing behind them. We see a shift in general deck popularity. F&G Shadow, for example, is now a lot more popular, even though Evo Last Word's Shadow is by no means a bad deck. The same can be said about Aggro Rally Sword, as Evo Rally Sword players shift over to the more aggressive list. Dirt Rune turns out to be too weak, and Yukishima Rune, while still considered tier 3, occasionally gets used in a competitive setting due to being able to counter the Shadow and Rune decks in tier 1, while being terrible against almost everything else. Before we explore the meta in detail, remember to like and subscribe to our Tempo Strategy YouTube channel for the latest decks and strategy content. Be sure to check out the Shadowverse section at tempostorm.com for the full meta snapshot, as well as other Shadowverse content. Remaining at the top of this month's meta snapshot is F&G Shadow and Evo Last Word Shadow. While composition-wise they may share a handful of core Shadowcraft cards, the two decks continue to play out differently, with F&G being more controlling in nature, and Evo Last Word Shadow being close to a mid-range deck. Both decks have a wide spectrum of positive to even matchups across the board, with one important difference. F&G Shadow is favorable against handless blood, while Evo Shadow does not do very well against it. Spellboost Rune maintains its spot in tier 1 for the whole Edge of Paradise meta, as the quantity of its removal options helps it stabilize against board-focused decks in most games. And because Spellboost Rune leaves no board on most of the opponent's turn, it also effectively stymies Shadow decks. Generally, it will lose either if Kuan is drawn too late, or if the opponent puts on too much pressure in the mid-game. Aggro Rally Sword has become the de facto Swordcraft deck over its sibling Evo Rally Sword, securing its slot at the top of the tier 2 list. While on paper its matchups may not look all that great, its ease of play allows even newer players to find more consistent success over the more complex tier 1 options, and its fast and aggressive gameplay makes Aggro Rally Sword a powerful laddering deck of choice. Skipping over Artifact Portal and Buff Dragon, we arrive at the bottom of tier 2, where Handless Blood resides. We have yet another hyper-aggressive archetype with the aim of reaching an empty hand as quickly as possible to invoke Parasilice, Demon of Greed, and activate its finishers. The deck has been gaining popularity as it is somewhat effective against Last Word's Shadow, Rally Sword, and Buff Dragon, and has a high roll potential that can sometimes be enough to challenge even Flame and Glass Shadow. F&G Shadow and Evo Last Word's Shadow still dominate the charts with their broad range of positive matchups. While the two decks play differently, they share a similar core and have their own strengths that players can swap based on the frequency of other decks without too much additional investment. Our professional player Essia has written a very in-depth guide for F&G Shadow, so be sure to check it out. For newer players, Aggro Rally Sword is a favorite among the VTuber guests and their coaches in Buddy System due to the ease of piloting, so much so that we ended up having to encourage the teams to try out alternative classes. As expected, not too many changes have happened in the past 3 weeks, to a point where we could have likely gotten away with just copying and pasting our previous meta snapshot. The additions from the mini expansion remain relatively impactful, and the two Shadowcraft decks and Spellboost Rune have proven their worth and are ahead of the pack. Overall, the relative positions in the upper end of the tier list remain the same as in the previous meta snapshot iteration, and the analysis might actually turn out to be even more accurate as trends solidify. Things get a little more interesting when it comes to the lower half of tier 2, as Handless Blood replaces Evo Blood as the blood deck of choice, and players have found Dirt Rune to be relatively weak despite Riley being a powerful addition. No big meta changes are expected in the remainder of the expansion. The new Roar of the Godwyrm expansion is right around the corner, with a host of familiar cards returning to the battlefields. Be prepared for the return of Bahamut, because what can go wrong with a much more powerful version of a card that ultimately got nerfed 3 years ago? We will have our own exclusive reveals on June 18 and 21, so look forward to those. While the Edge of Paradise expansion has brought us diversity, we hope to see the next expansion seriously shaking up the overall meta. It would be refreshing to see some new faces in the tier 1 list. Shadowverse will be celebrating its 6th anniversary on the 17th. Players will once again be showered with gifts and special in-game events, so now is the perfect time to get your friends to start playing Shadowverse. The Buddy System All-Stars event will return this Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific, with a full cast of players from the Niji-Sanji team, so make sure to tune in and tweet out with the hashtag #SVBuddySystem for a chance to get a free card pack. See you all in next month's edition of the Tempo Storm Shadowverse Meta Snapshot.